Hi, everybody. So, I'm going to take you through a bit of story time today. What we're going to do is go over how I completed a cross country cycle. So, back in 2020, I cycled from Farnham all the way to Falmouth in 4 consecutive days. We did this for charity, and we were raising money for the Mermaid Centre, which is the breast cancer clinic in our local hospital, Royal Cornwall Hospitals Trust. We had a client at the time who unfortunately was suffering with breast cancer. So we wanted to raise some money for that specific unit. So we decided it'd be a good idea. We had a gym in Farnham and a gym in Falmouth to cycle from gym to gym over a 4 day period. So I'm going to take you through exactly how I trained for this and also how I found it. What were the pros? What were the cons? How was the whole experience? Now, here is a little picture here of the map of how far we had to cycle. So almost completely across the country. So almost completely from one side to the other. It was a really fun trip. And if anybody has the time to put towards doing something like this, I fully recommend it. It was a really fun experience and I really, really enjoyed it. But let's get into the training. So it was about a 12-week training cycle going into this charity event. And I myself was doing roughly 3 times per week training on strength and 3 times per week of scheduled in endurance training. At the time, I also was cycling to and from work a little bit. However, my work was only about 15 minutes away from home. So, but it definitely did help with training, doing that cycle to and from work. In terms of the strength training, when you're doing a big endurance event like this, you're not going to be doing, you're not looking to increase your strength massively or build loads of muscle during this period because your predominant focus is endurance. The main purpose of the strength training is one to maintain as much strength and power as possible to help you on these long routes, but also to prevent injury, keeping our joints strong. When you're doing something like running, cycling, swimming over long distances, it can be very easy to get injured due to the high repetition nature of the task at hand. So, when we're doing strength training, we're not only strengthening the areas which we're using a lot, but we're making sure the areas that get neglected during these practices are still maintaining their strength. So during my strength training 3 times a week, I was doing a lot of making sure that my lower back stayed healthy because I was on a road bike. You bent over quite a lot. My lower back stayed healthy. My hamstrings and glutes stayed healthy. My knees stayed healthy during this cycle. Then for my endurance trainings, I was doing 3 types of cycles. One would be a short burst, a quick sprint cycle of a shorter distance. One would be a more casual, just getting the miles in, kind of conversational pace cycle. And one would be a longer distance, making sure I'm getting to certain heart rate zones where I'm going. Because on this cycle, we were doing over 100K days on the bike. So we needed to make sure that when we were cycling, we could withstand that amount of time on the pedals. Then, towards the end of the 12 weeks, what we would start doing is transitioning out of those shorter cycles and into more longer distance cycles. So, getting used to those 100K cycles, but also doing back to back days because we needed to be able to withstand doing multiple days in a row. Now, I never in my training cycle did 4 back to back days like we were doing on the actual event, but I did do a few 2 days back to back on the weekends of long cycles just to teach my body what it was like to do those 2 days back to back. Here is an example of one of the 100K cycles that I would do. So in Cornwall, it is quite hilly down here. If any of you are from here, it is quite hilly in Cornwall. So as you can see, there's a lot of elevation gain on this, but it would be 100K. We would do around Cornwall and just take our time doing it. We would often stop, find pit stops around with cafes where we'd have a sandwich and a coffee, maybe taking a view, because on the charity event, we were going to be stopping, but we wanted to know how long we would be moving for. So we had an idea of what the day would be like, and then trying to keep our average speed above a certain point. And generally, we'd be trying to keep our average speed above 20 kilometers per hour. Now, as you can see here, you end up burning quite a lot of calories on these walks, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But on these walks, sorry, on these cycles. But this would be my longest distance really in training. I never really did more than 100K because there's not really much need to. Even if one of the days on a cycle, I think was 140K on the actual event, but there's no need to do that much every time because you don't want to burn yourself out at the same time. So this would kind of be the longest distance I would do. Now let's get into the pros and cons. Now, some of the do's, so many pros of doing an event like this and training for an event like this. What I found was that my endurance was at a level it had never been before. I felt like towards the end, and when we did the event, that I would never get tired. I felt like my endurance was really, really good. It's never been at that level before. And I've done a lot of endurance based events, but never has it been as good as that. My blood pressure and my resting heart rate was at the best it had ever been. My resting heart rate was quite low, sometimes in the 40s and 50s, very, very, very low resting heart rate, and my blood pressure was spot on. The beauty of this kind of training is you can do it anywhere. So if the weather wasn't great, I would just go to the gym and I would jump on a bike and cycle on a bike in the gym. It's better if you can cycle on the road for sure, because it's more like what you're going to be doing. But I just jump on a bike in the gym and get a few kilometers on there. And also, what's great about training for endurance in Cornwall is it makes everywhere else a lot easier due to the nature of the gradients in Cornwall. There's a lot of hills. So it made everywhere else that we cycled a lot easier to cycle. I often joke because we cycled from Farnham to Falmouth, and essentially, until we hit Cornwall, it felt like we were cycling downhill because we were so used to cycling hills all the time. And then as soon as we crossed the border into Cornwall, we instantly hit a place called Minions, which has got it was a massive hill up to the top. And so we'd gone pretty much downhill from Farnham all the way to Cornwall and then hit a huge hill. As soon as we crossed the border over a bridge, we hit a massive, massive hill. Now, let's get into the cons because it's not all easy, it's not all amazing. There are some cons to training for an event like this. And one of the main things is that this kind of training requires a lot of time just because of the nature of the distance that we're covering on a daily basis. So, if you're wanting to do something like this, if you're wanting to do an event that takes multiple days or an event that takes quite a lot of distance, you have to be able to put the time aside in your training. And it's only 12 weeks. So I only did 3 months of training for this. So I managed to allocate the time for it. But you need to remember that you're going to have to allocate the time to get your body used to this. Some of the 10K days, yeah, I may have only been cycling for 4 hours, but it was more like 6 hours when you take into account stops and stuff like that. I will say endurance training does make you very hungry. That is something that happened. I was hungry all the time. I could eat pretty much anything all the time. So you got to manage that, as it may feel like you've earned the food. And that is partially true. You want to be eating a lot, but it can also be easy to overeat because of how hungry it makes you. Another con, and this is kind of going against the pro I put a minute ago, training in Cornwall is hard because of the nature of the hills. Now, this is a two-sided coin. It's hard. So initially it makes it harder, but once you get used to it, everything gets easier. So if you can get past those hills initially and get used to them, you are going to be flying. And another con is you can't do everything all at once. I've noticed this as a personal trainer. It's quite easy for me to want to start doing strength training, and then I want to go on a cut, and then I want to do calisthenics, and then I want to do some form of endurance. I want to run a marathon, and you can't do it all at once. You need to pick one goal at a time, especially for such a specific event as this. So you need to know that while you're doing a long endurance based thing, you're not going to potentially going to be getting much stronger. You're not going to be building much more muscle. What I will say, when you're doing a long endurance thing, you're probably going to lose a bit of body fat. So if that's one of your goals, great, wonderful. But it's not going to be a case of you're going to be able to cycle 100K days and get the strongest you've ever been and build muscle mass. It's not possible. So just know for those 3 months, your endurance is going to be taking top priority. Now, here's a picture of us at the end of the cycle. We did this as a group. And what was great is we actually managed to raise over £10,000 for this. We documented the whole thing, and a lot of people really dug into it and they loved it. And we managed to raise £10,000 for the Mermaid Centre. And it was a really lovely thing to do. Now, if you're wanting to get into a big endurance challenge this year, one of the pillars, one of the 5 pillars of the Horizon Venture system is the endurance engine. And we work with you specifically on building the endurance necessary to do something like this. It is possible. I had never done anything this big before doing this, and I never thought it was possible. But actually, due to the training we did and doing it correctly, it was a lot easier than I thought it would be. I thought this was going to be one of the hardest things I ever did in my life. And actually, it was much, much easier because we got the right training in. So if this is something you're interested in, give us a message and we will help you and we can train you for that. It is completely possible. Every person here in this photo, most of them had never done anything like this. Chris, who's in the middle here next to me, I'm the short guy towards the left. Chris, who's the bald guy, is next to me. He'd never done anything like this before, and he'd smashed it. He was an older guy, and he'd done really, really well. So if you're interested, that was my training. Those are the pros and cons. Get involved, and we can help you. Cheers.